Tom Mitchell, a 34-year-old high school biology teacher and father of two, thought his biggest challenge was balancing single parenthood with mortgage payments after his recent divorce. Then Janet Whitmore knocked on his door at 7:15 on a Saturday morning, wielding a metal ruler and demanding to measure his front lawn grass height. What unfolded over the next 3 months would test everything he believed about community, fairness, and protecting his children's sense of home. Before this story begins, consider, how well do you really know your neighborhood rules? This happened just 8 months ago in a suburban community outside Denver, Colorado. The family still lives there today. After hearing this, you'll never look at an HOA notice the same way again. Tom had moved into Willowbrook Estates 2 years earlier, drawn by the excellent school district and the promise of a stable community for Emma, age 8, and Connor, age 6. The modest 3-bedroom ranch home stretched his teaching salary, but he believed his children deserved the security of a good neighborhood after the upheaval of divorce. He spent his weekends maintaining the small front lawn, teaching his kids to help with age-appropriate tasks, and creating the kind of home environment he dreamed of providing. The morning Janet appeared at his door, Tom had been enjoying a rare quiet moment with his coffee while the children slept in. He'd worked late the night before, grading papers and preparing lesson plans for his advanced placement biology classes. The knock came sharp and insistent, the kind that immediately signals trouble. When he opened the door, he found a woman in her late 60s holding what appeared to be a contractor's measuring stick and a clipboard thick with papers. Janet Whitmore had been the self-appointed guardian of Willowbrook Estates landscaping standards since her husband Harold's death 3 years prior. As a retired head librarian, who had spent 42 years organizing information and enforcing institutional rules, she approached HOA compliance with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to library cataloging systems. Her grief had transformed into an obsessive need for neighborhood perfection, as if maintaining absolute order could somehow fill the void left by Harold's absence. That Saturday morning, Janet informed Tom that his grass appeared to exceed the community's maximum height requirement of 2½ inches, as specified in Section 4.3.2 of the HOA landscaping guidelines. She requested permission to measure his lawn to document the violation. Tom, still processing this unexpected intrusion, agreed to let her proceed, assuming this would resolve whatever concern she had identified. What happened next would haunt Tom for weeks. Janet methodically worked across his small front lawn, crouching every few feet to press her ruler into the grass and record measurements on her clipboard. She photographed each measurement location with a digital camera, creating what appeared to be a forensic documentation system. The process took nearly 45 minutes, during which several neighbors emerged from their homes to observe the spectacle unfolding on Tom's lawn. 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Connor eventually woke and came to the front window, confused by the strange woman kneeling in their yard with measuring tools. Tom felt his chest tighten as he watched his children's faces, knowing they were already dealing with enough change and uncertainty. The last thing they needed was additional stress in their home environment, the one place where he could provide them stability. Janet concluded her inspection by informing Tom that 17 different locations exceeded the maximum height requirement, with measurements ranging from 2.7 to 3.2 inches. She would be filing an official violation notice, and he would receive formal documentation within 3 business days. The initial fine would be $50, with additional daily penalties of $10 until the violation was corrected. She recommended he hire a professional lawn service to ensure compliance with community standards. Tom spent that afternoon researching the HOA's landscaping guidelines, discovering a 28-page document filled with specific requirements he'd never encountered during his home purchase process. The grass height limitation was indeed specified, along with detailed regulations governing everything from flowerbed borders to mailbox appearance standards. He also learned that Janet served as the volunteer chair of the Landscaping Compliance Committee, a position she'd held for 8 consecutive years. The official violation notice arrived on Tuesday, professionally formatted, and accompanied by Janet's photographs and measurement documentation. The level of detail was extraordinary, more thorough than many scientific research reports Tom had reviewed during his graduate studies. Each photograph was labeled with precise location coordinates, measurement readings, and timestamps. The documentation concluded with a requirement for professional remediation within 7 days to avoid escalating penalties. Tom contacted 3 local lawn care services, discovering that professional mowing would cost him approximately $60 per visit, well beyond his already strained budget. As a single father managing mortgage payments, child support obligations, and the normal expenses of raising 2 children, he couldn't justify the additional monthly expense. He decided to purchase a more precise mowing equipment and handle the maintenance himself, ensuring compliance with the community's exacting standards. The following Saturday, Tom spent 3 hours meticulously mowing his lawn to exactly 2 1/4 inches, using a ruler to verify the height in multiple locations. He felt confident he'd addressed Janet's concerns and could return his focus to the more important aspects of his life, preparing engaging lessons for his students, and creating positive experiences for Emma and Connor during their weekend visits. Janet returned the next Tuesday morning, again equipped with her measuring tools and documentation materials. This time she identified 12 locations where the grass had allegedly grown beyond acceptable limits since Tom's recent mowing. She explained that grass growth was a continuous process, requiring regular monitoring and maintenance to ensure ongoing compliance. She would be conducting weekly inspections to verify adherence to community standards. The absurdity of the situation began to crystallize in Tom's mind. He was being subjected to weekly grass measurements by a neighbor who seemed to have unlimited time for such activities. While he struggled to balance teaching responsibilities, single parenthood, and basic home maintenance, the stress was affecting his sleep, his lesson preparation, and his patience with his children during their precious weekend time together. Over the next month, Janet's inspections became increasingly frequent and detailed. She began documenting not only grass height, but also the precision of his lawn edges, the symmetry of his mowing patterns, and the appearance of his flower bed borders. She photographed dandelions in his backyard, measured the height of his mailbox post, and documented the placement of his garbage cans on collection day. Each inspection generated formal violation notices with mounting financial penalties. Tom's attempts to communicate with Janet directly proved fruitless. She insisted that her role was simply to enforce existing community standards equally across all residents. When he requested copies of other violation notices to verify equal enforcement, she cited privacy policies preventing the disclosure of other residents' compliance records. When he asked to review the HOA board meeting minutes discussing landscaping enforcement priorities, she directed him to submit formal written requests through proper administrative channels. The financial pressure mounted steadily as violation fines accumulated. Tom calculated that he'd received over $400 in penalties during the first 6 weeks, money he desperately needed for his children's school supplies, extracurricular activities, and basic living expenses. He began mowing his lawn twice weekly despite the additional time burden and equipment wear. He purchased specialized lawn care tools, spent his Sunday afternoons hand trimming grass edges with scissors, and researched professional landscaping techniques online. Emma and Connor began asking questions about the strange woman who kept visiting their yard with measuring tools. Tom struggled to explain the situation in age-appropriate terms without expressing his growing frustration and anger. He wanted his children to respect community rules and authority figures, but he also wanted them to understand that fairness and reasonableness should guide such interactions. The balance proved impossible to maintain as Janet's behavior became increasingly intrusive and demanding. The breaking point came during a particularly stressful week in October. Tom had been dealing with a challenging parent conference situation at school, Emma had been struggling with math homework, requiring extra support, and Connor had developed a minor illness requiring a doctor visit and careful monitoring. Tom's lawn maintenance had been postponed for several days due to these pressing family responsibilities. Janet arrived on Thursday morning with her usual measuring equipment, but this time, she was accompanied by 2 other neighborhood residents Tom didn't recognize. She explained that she'd brought witnesses to document what she described as chronic non-compliance with community standards. The inspection took over an hour, with extensive photography and measurement documentation. Janet announced that she would be recommending escalated enforcement action, potentially including legal proceedings to compel compliance. Tom felt something fundamental shift inside him that morning. The situation had moved beyond reasonable rule enforcement into what felt like systematic harassment designed to drive him from the neighborhood. He realized that his children were watching him respond to this treatment, and his reaction would teach them lessons about standing up for themselves, accepting unfair authority, and protecting their family's dignity and security. That evening, Tom began researching his rights as an HOA member and the proper procedures for challenging enforcement actions. He discovered that the community's governing documents included specific requirements for fair and equal rule enforcement, due process protections for residents facing penalties, and procedures for appealing violation notices. He also learned that HOA board members and committee chairs were required to follow their own community's standards when serving in leadership positions. Tom's scientific background proved invaluable as he began systematically documenting his interactions with Janet and researching the broader patterns of her enforcement activities. He created detailed records of each inspection, photographed the conditions of his lawn before and after each mowing, and began quietly investigating whether other residents were receiving similar treatment for similar violations. His research revealed disturbing patterns in Janet's enforcement activities. Through careful observation and conversations with neighbors, Tom discovered that Janet's inspections appeared to focus disproportionately on newer residents, single-parent households, and families with young children. Long-term residents with established relationships in the community seemed to receive far less scrutiny, despite having landscaping conditions that appeared comparable to, or worse than those generating violation notices for others. The discovery that would change everything came during Tom's systematic review of the entire neighborhood's landscaping conditions. As someone trained in scientific observation and data collection, he began conducting his own photographic survey of all community properties, documenting grass heights, lawn maintenance standards, and compliance with the various landscaping requirements Janet had been enforcing so rigorously. Tom's survey revealed something that stopped him in his tracks. Janet's own property violated multiple HOA landscaping standards she'd been zealously enforcing against others. Her backyard grass exceeded the maximum height requirements in numerous locations, some areas measuring over 4 inches tall. Her front flower bed borders were irregular and poorly maintained, contradicting standards she'd cited in violation notices to other residents. Most significantly, her mailbox post height exceeded community requirements by nearly 6 inches, and her driveway had weeds growing through cracks that clearly violated maintenance standards. The hypocrisy was breathtaking in its scope and audacity. Janet had been conducting detailed inspections of other residents' properties, while maintaining her own in clear violation of the same standards. She'd been imposing hundreds of dollars in fines on families struggling with normal life pressures while ignoring identical or worse conditions on her own property. Tom realized he had discovered the evidence needed to challenge Janet's authority and expose the unfair enforcement patterns that had been causing stress and financial hardship for multiple families. But he also understood that confronting Janet directly would likely result in escalated harassment and retaliation. He needed allies and a strategic approach that would protect not only his own family but also other residents who had been subjected to similar treatment. Dr. Kim Patel had moved into Willowbrook Estates 6 months earlier with her husband and 3 teenage children. As a professional landscape architect with 20 years of experience designing sustainable residential and commercial properties, she brought expertise that most HOA volunteers lacked. She'd noticed Janet's frequent presence in various neighborhood yards but had initially assumed this reflected normal community maintenance oversight. Tom approached Dr. Patel carefully, sharing his documentation of Janet's enforcement patterns and his discovery of the violations on Janet's own property. Dr. Patel's professional expertise allowed her to immediately verify Tom's findings and identify additional technical violations he'd missed. She confirmed that Janet's property maintenance fell well below the standards being enforced against other residents, creating a clear case of discriminatory and hypocritical rule application. More importantly, Dr. Patel revealed that several other neighbors had privately expressed concerns about Janet's enforcement activities. The retired couple next door to Tom had received violation notices for minor landscaping issues while dealing with the husband's cancer treatments. A single mother 3 houses down had been fined repeatedly for grass height violations while working double shifts to support her family. An elderly widower had been cited for mailbox appearance issues during the same week he'd been hospitalized for heart surgery. Dr. Patel agreed to help Tom organize a response that would address the systematic problems with HOA enforcement while protecting residents who had been unfairly targeted. Her professional credentials and expertise would lend authority to their challenge, while her relative newcomer status meant she hadn't yet been drawn into existing neighborhood political dynamics. The strategy they developed was methodical and comprehensive. Tom would compile detailed documentation of Janet's enforcement patterns, including photographic evidence of selective application and the violations on Janet's own property. Dr. Patel would prepare a professional analysis of proper HOA landscaping standards and enforcement procedures, drawing on her expertise and knowledge of industry best practices. Together, they would present their findings to the HOA board and request immediate reform of enforcement policies. The preparation process took several weeks, during which Janet continued her regular inspections and violation notices. Tom maintained meticulous compliance with all landscaping requirements while systematically documenting every interaction. Dr. Patel conducted her own comprehensive survey of neighborhood properties, creating professional, quality reports that would be difficult for the HOA board to dismiss or ignore. The evidence they compiled was overwhelming in its scope and clarity. Janet had issued violation notices to 14 different households over the past year, with enforcement patterns that clearly correlated with resident demographics rather than actual violation severity. Long-term residents with significant landscaping issues had been ignored, while newer residents and families with young children had been subjected to intensive scrutiny for minor infractions. Most damaging to Janet's credibility was the detailed documentation of violations on her own property. Dr. Patel's professional photographs and measurements revealed landscaping conditions that would have generated hundreds of dollars in fines if discovered on any other resident's property. The double standard was so blatant that it undermined Janet's entire enforcement authority and raised serious questions about her fitness for the volunteer position she'd held for 8 years. Tom requested time to address the HOA board during their monthly meeting, following proper procedures for resident concerns. He prepared a presentation that combined his scientific documentation with Dr. Patel's professional analysis, creating a compelling case for immediate reform of enforcement policies and Janet's removal from the Landscaping Compliance Committee. The evening of the board meeting, Tom felt nervous but determined as he prepared to speak publicly about the harassment his family had endured. Emma and Connor knew their father was attending an important community meeting about their home, and they'd given him encouraging hugs before he left. He carried with him not only his own documentation but also written statements from other residents who had experienced similar treatment. The HOA board meeting was held in the community clubhouse, with approximately 30 residents in attendance. Janet sat in the front row, her usual clipboard and measuring tools visible in her lap. She appeared confident and prepared, likely expecting to defend her enforcement activities as necessary for maintaining community standards. Tom's presentation methodically laid out the evidence of discriminatory enforcement, beginning with the patterns of selective targeting and escalating to the revelation of violations on Janet's own property. He used his experience as an educator to present complex information clearly and persuasively, ensuring that every board member and community resident could understand the scope of the problems he documented. The reaction in the room was immediate and dramatic. Residents who had been quietly suffering under Janet's enforcement began speaking up, sharing their own experiences with harassment and unfair treatment. The elderly couple dealing with cancer treatments described receiving violation notices during their most vulnerable moments. The single mother working double shifts explained how the mounting fines had forced her to choose between lawn care services and her children's needs. Dr. Patel's professional testimony provided the technical expertise needed to validate Tom's findings and demonstrate the severity of Janet's misconduct. Her credentials and industry experience gave weight to the charges of incompetent and biased enforcement. She presented alternative approaches for community landscaping oversight that would be both effective and fair, showing that reform was not only necessary but entirely achievable. Janet's response revealed the depth of her psychological investment in maintaining control over neighborhood landscaping standards. She became defensive and hostile, insisting that her enforcement activities had been necessary to prevent community deterioration and protect property values. She claimed that the violations on her own property were minor and temporary, while those she cited on other properties represented ongoing neglect and disrespect for community standards. The board members' questions grew increasingly pointed as they processed the evidence Tom and Dr. Patel had presented. They asked Janet to explain her selective enforcement patterns, her failure to maintain her own property to the standards she imposed on others, and her apparent targeting of vulnerable residents during times of personal crisis. Her answers became increasingly evasive and contradictory, further undermining her credibility and authority. The community's response to Tom's revelations was overwhelmingly supportive. Residents who had been intimidated by Janet's authority began sharing their own stories of unreasonable enforcement and harassment. A picture emerged of a committee chair who had used her volunteer position to exercise inappropriate control over neighbors' lives, causing stress and financial hardship for families already dealing with normal life challenges. The HOA board voted unanimously to immediately suspend Janet's authority as landscaping compliance committee chair pending a comprehensive review of all violation notices issued during her tenure. They appointed Dr. Patel as interim chair to develop new enforcement policies that would ensure fair and consistent application of community standards. All outstanding fines resulting from Janet's enforcement activities were suspended pending individual review and verification. The investigation that followed revealed even more extensive problems with Janet's enforcement record. Multiple violation notices had been issued for conditions that didn't actually violate community standards. Documentation had been selectively edited to make minor infractions appear more serious. Photographic evidence had been taken from misleading angles to exaggerate landscaping problems. The systematic nature of these problems indicated a pattern of misconduct that had persisted for years. Janet's resignation from all HOA volunteer positions came within 2 weeks of the board meeting. She submitted a brief letter citing personal health reasons, without acknowledging the misconduct that had been documented or apologizing to the residents who had been unfairly targeted. Her departure removed the source of harassment that had been causing stress for multiple families. But the community still needed to heal from the divisions and mistrust her actions had created. Tom's victory extended far beyond his personal situation to encompass meaningful reform of community governance. The new enforcement policies developed under Dr. Patel's leadership emphasized education and assistance rather than punishment, with clear procedures for appeals and dispute resolution. Violation notices would require verification by multiple committee members before being issued, preventing the kind of individual bias that had characterized Janet's tenure. The financial resolution was equally satisfying. The HOA board voted to refund all fines that had been imposed through Janet's biased enforcement activities, recognizing that residents had been subjected to unfair treatment that violated community principles of equal protection and due process. Tom received a check for over $600, money he immediately dedicated to Emma and Connor's college savings accounts. More importantly, the community began healing from the fear and division that Janet's authoritarian approach had created. Neighbors started communicating more openly about landscaping challenges, offering assistance and advice rather than criticism and surveillance. The landscaping committee transformed from an enforcement agency into a resource for residents seeking to improve their properties within community guidelines. Dr. Patel's leadership brought professional standards and genuine expertise to community landscaping oversight. She organized educational workshops on sustainable landscaping practices, negotiated group discounts with local lawn care services for residents who needed assistance, and created a volunteer network for helping elderly or disabled residents with yard maintenance during difficult periods. Tom's children benefited enormously from watching their father stand up for their family's rights and dignity. Emma and Connor learned valuable lessons about fairness, courage, and the importance of protecting community members who are being treated unfairly. They saw their father transform from a victim of harassment into a leader who created positive change that helped many families. The experience fundamentally changed Tom's relationship with his neighborhood and his understanding of community involvement. He joined the HOA board the following year, bringing his scientific approach to problem solving and his commitment to fair treatment for all residents. His teaching background proved invaluable in developing policies that were both clear and reasonable, preventing future conflicts through better communication and mutual understanding. Janet's departure from community leadership didn't immediately resolve her personal issues with grief and isolation, but it removed her ability to channel those problems into harassment of her neighbors. Some residents reported seeing her occasionally walking through the neighborhood, observing landscaping conditions with apparent continued interest but no longer carrying measuring tools or cameras. Her own property maintenance gradually improved as she apparently began applying to herself the same standards she had demanded of others. The broader lessons of Tom's experience resonated throughout Willowbrook Estates and beyond. Other HOA communities in the area requested copies of the new enforcement policies Dr. Patel had developed, recognizing the value of fair and professional approaches to community standards. Tom was invited to speak at regional HOA training sessions, sharing his story as an example of how residents could effectively challenge abusive authority while building stronger communities. Tom's relationship with his ex-wife even improved as she recognized the positive changes in his confidence and leadership abilities. She began encouraging Emma and Connor to share more details about their weekend experiences with their father, leading to better communication about CO parenting decisions and shared pride in their children's development in a stable, supportive neighborhood environment. The transformation of Tom's daily life was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of his struggle against Janet's harassment. He no longer dreaded weekends because of landscaping obligations or feared unexpected knocks on his door from hostile neighbors. His children could play in their front yard without worrying about strange adults with measuring tools documenting their activities. His home truly became the sanctuary he'd hoped to create when he first moved to Willowbrook Estates. The community garden project that Dr. Patel initiated during her second year as landscaping committee chair became a symbol of the positive changes Tom's courage had made possible. Families worked together to create shared green spaces, teaching children about sustainable practices while building relationships across generational and cultural lines. Emma and Connor became enthusiastic participants, learning about plant biology that connected to their father's professional expertise, while developing friendships with neighbors of all ages. Tom's story spread beyond his immediate community through social media and local news coverage, inspiring other homeowners facing similar harassment to document problems and seek fair resolution. His scientific approach to gathering evidence became a model for residents dealing with abusive HOA enforcement, while Dr. Patel's policy reforms were adopted by communities seeking to prevent such problems from developing. 3 years after Janet's resignation, Tom still lived in the same house with Emma and Connor, but their experience of home had been completely transformed. What had once been a source of stress and financial pressure had become a place of genuine community belonging and mutual support. Tom's lawn remained well-maintained, but now his neighbors offered assistance and encouragement rather than criticism and surveillance. The measuring ruler that had once symbolized harassment and control was eventually donated to the community garden tool shed, where it served the constructive purpose of helping families plan their planting layouts. Tom sometimes smiled when he saw children using it to measure rows for their vegetables, thinking about how the same tool that had once caused his family such distress was now helping build the kind of community he'd always hoped his children would experience. If this situation unfolded in your neighborhood, would you find the courage to stand up like Tom did? Sometimes protecting what matters most requires us to discover strength we never knew we had. Tom's story reminds us that communities thrive when residents have the courage to challenge unfairness, the wisdom to seek professional guidance, and the commitment to create positive change that benefits everyone. The difference between a neighborhood ruled by fear and one built on mutual respect often comes down to one person's willingness to document the truth, gather allies, and